Hi again, folks. It is time for another Anchor tutorial series. This one is on context and quote integration. It's going to be a bit of a longer one. There's a lot of detail into this, so hopefully you enjoy. So let's begin with the goals of this particular tutorial. We're looking at context, so we want to understand why context is necessary in the first place, especially in an argumentative paper. We want to understand the necessary amount of context required at different parts of the paper. We also want to understand how to bring context into your quote integration to try to make it one coherent sentence. And finally, we want to identify strong and weak types of quote integration. We'll give you a couple of tutorials on that moving forward. So let's begin with our prompt. We've been doing this every time. Here's our prompt. Using the novel Things Fall Apart and historical sources, analyze the motives for African imperialism and evaluate their impacts on African society. Consider both the European and indigenous perspectives. As we go through this, we'll be looking at this prompt and we'll be looking at particular quote integration using some of our historical documents. In order to be able to understand all of our writing, we have to go with our prompt and then also with our thesis. So here's our sample thesis. We constructed this in the thesis tutorial. If you need to read that or rewatch that, go back and see that to understand how we came up with this thesis here. Although the Europeans believed that imperialism would help Africans, ultimately they caused political and social problems which negatively impacted Igbo culture. Remember, everyone has seen this thesis. Do not use this thesis, but that's going to help us moving forward so we understand how to contextualize our quote that we're using. Okay, so context. What is context? Context gives you background details connecting your main argument to the evidence that you're actually providing. For example, in this presentation, if we hadn't already talked about what context is, and I just started with this slide, you wouldn't understand the points that I'm making. So I needed to give you those first few slides as context to let you know what I'm talking about. You're going to try to do the same thing in your writing, provide a little context to explain the concrete detail. So when it comes to context, remember, you need context prior to each concrete detail. You want to allow the reader to understand what information is necessary to really get why the information you're providing with the evidence is significant or important. All right. So to begin, we have to use a concrete detail example. So let's pick this concrete detail as one we've chosen to use. The white missionary placed gifts at grandfather's feet. I have a question. In fact, I have a lot of questions. Who's grandfather? Question number one. What are we talking about? Why are gifts being laid at this grandfather's feet? Without any context, this quote doesn't do anything for me. So what does a reader need to know to better understand this quote? The answer is soapstone. Now, I'm not going to take time to go over every single letter, but we should know that soapstone stands for speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, subject, and ultimately tone. Many of these things are important to give us context in our quote integration. Particularly, we need to know who the speaker is. We need to know who this speaker is and where he comes from. We don't just want to know their name. We need to know more than that. We also need to know about the occasion. What event led to the author creating this particular document or idea? Where does it come from? And then finally, purpose. What does the speaker hope to gain through this particular document? If we can understand the speaker and the occasion and the purpose, we can provide some context as we bring the concrete detail to life. So with our soapstone in mind, let's try to figure out what we can use for our necessary context for this quote. The quote is still, the white missionary placed gifts at grandfather's feet. So who's the speaker? It's Prince Modupe from Ghana. When was this written? What's the occasion? This is Prince Modupe's autobiography, and he's recounting his first experience with Europeans. Why did he write it? What's the purpose? He was trying to explain the impact that the arrival of Europeans had on his tribe. So he has a tone, he has a point of view, and he's trying to explain how that all helped and maybe hurt his tribe. So with that in mind, with the soapstone ideas along with our quote, we have to figure out how to bring these two ideas together. Here in front of you is some weak quote integration. In the autobiography of Prince Modupe from present-day Ghana, he suggests that the white men attacked his tribe when the white missionary placed gifts at his grandfather's feet. What makes this weak quote integration? We have some missing pieces. Parts of the soapstone, like occasion and purpose, they're not there. And also, this is kind of misrepresenting what the quote is actually saying. It's not historically accurate. All right, so here's another weak quote integration. In the autobiography of Prince Modupe from present-day Ghana, he describes the arrival of the Europeans to his village when he says the white missionary placed gifts at his grandfather's feet. There's a couple things wrong with this. First of all, it's missing an argument. It doesn't really address what your ideas are. It doesn't suggest how this fits into your topic sentence or your thesis. And secondly, it kind of overstates the significance of what the quote really is saying, that he describes the arrival of Europeans to his village when he says that they did just this. There was other stuff that was going on in this document. It's a bit overstated. Now let's look at some stronger quote integration. Here's the same quote with different quote integration and context. Prince Medupe, a prince from modern-day Ghana, recalled in his autobiography that when he was young, the European missionaries came to his tribe and the white missionaries placed gifts at grandfather's feet. So what makes this better? First of all, flow. The context and concrete detail flow into each other nicely. There's even proper brackets to show that a change has been made to the concrete detail. The T was capitalized originally, and now it's lowercase, but that's still a change, and that makes it perfect. Success number 2 is that we have the speaker, occasion, and purpose all addressed and all done intentionally. We have the speaker with Prince Medupe. We have the occasion, which is basically in his autobiography here. And we have the purpose, which is that he was recalling that when he was young, he's kind of telling us what he was trying to do with the purpose of this particular document. Here's another version of strong quote integration, focusing specifically on the brackets. We've seen those used inappropriately and incorrectly often, so here's some good bracketing advice. Here's the quote. Prince Medupe, a prince from modern-day Ghana, recalled that when he was young, the Europeans attempted to buy his tribe away from their native religion because when the white missionary arrived, he placed gifts at grandfather's feet. Now this does a couple of things right, but it's also using brackets fairly well. The first part of this is that it uses brackets to show that a change was made, because originally we had a capital letter there, and this is making it flow better, but wasn't in the actual quote itself. The second success of this is that the brackets work to make it flow better, but it doesn't change the intention of the quote. It's still representing the quote correctly. It's not misrepresenting it. What I like about this integration as well is that it's even trying to bring in a little bit of commentary with this part here, suggesting that they were attempting to buy his tribe away from their native religion. It's a little bit of commentary and a little bit more complex. Before we wrap up, I wanted to give a little context hint. One of your documents is from, quote, the Foreign Office, and that's really vague. Just so we understand, the Foreign Office is a British governmental office that's responsible for protecting and promoting the interests of the United Kingdom worldwide. That comes to you from Wikipedia. Here's the actual definition if you want to look it up. What's important to understand about the Foreign Office is the perspective from which they're writing. This is a British document with the British intention of protecting and promoting the interests of the United Kingdom. That's really important, and it's going to impact the bias and the subtext and the tone of that particular document. Bear that in mind if you use the Foreign Office document. It can help with your concrete detail, or your quote integration and your context. So to conclude, let's take a look at what we did here. Why do we need context? Well, it lets the reader know where this quote that you're using comes from, and it connects your evidence to your thesis and to your topic sentence. It brings it all together. We need that context. How much context do we need? The answer here is kind of vague, but it's as much as necessary to give background. We don't want to give too much to tell everything about everyone that's ever happened, but we do want to give enough to make sure that it's very clear where this comes from. And finally, how do we bring context into integration? Use your soapstone. You've done the work, you have the soapstone, use it. And try to make sure that your quote flows into your own words. Try to not make it choppy. With that, I think we're about done, and thank you, Mr. Mize. Just kidding, you thought we were done. One more thing. This is an error of apocalyptic proportions. Do not use hanging quotes. This is something we've tried to be teaching you for the whole year. I think you've learned in 8th grade and 7th and 6th and forever, I think. A hanging quote looks like this. Here's one sentence. Prince Medupe was a prince from Ghana who wrote an autobiography, and there's that period there. Then we have another sentence all by itself. The white missionary placed gifts at grandfather's feet. That's a hanging quote. It's all by itself. It's not integrated. This will impact your grade heavily. Do not leave any hanging quotes. Okay, that's all for real this time. Thanks, Mr. Mize, for your help.